some of our community agencies that do such important work in our neighborhood, and in particular for our Martingrove community. So thank you so much for coming tonight. And I know we don't have all of the people here that we wanted, but it's still an opportunity, and we're still really glad that you came so that we can get to know you a bit more. There are different people here who've been here in the past, so it's nice to get to meet you and know you. We've got all the information that we will share with our students and staff. And then tonight's presentation, we will also are going to videotape, which is why we started a little bit later, so we can make sure that it's shared with our staff and our students because it's really, really important. And having a school that where everyone in the building, every staff member, every student, everyone who works here can come and bring their full, true selves to school and feel cared for and feel like they belong and feel engaged and thrive. That's what we want here, and that's what we're learning. And I still have a lot to learn in terms of how to make that happen, so I'm really excited to listen and learn tonight. And our amazing superintendent is also here, so we're really, really grateful. And we have an amazing school council who are just so supportive of everything that goes on at school. They challenge in all the right ways. They have amazing and creative ideas, and I feel really grateful to work with all of them.
Thank you, Lee, Principal Thornton. I'm Felicia Cito-Lau, and I'm a parent of a grade 9 student here. And I am pleased to be able to share the land acknowledgement with all of you this evening. So we acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Heather Vickers, a member of Martingrove's School Parent Council here, and one of your co-hosts for tonight. Thank you, Felicia, for that very important reading today. And many thanks to all of you for coming out tonight to hear from our very special guest tonight. Now, in order for this event to run smoothly, we must all cooperate with each other so that we can hear the main message being presented tonight. Please turn off your phones or ensure that your ringers and alerts have been silenced. If you feel the need to take pictures, please conduct yourselves in a way that doesn't disrupt those around you. And please listen and engage with respect towards one another as we gather here at MCI. Swearing, hostile, or threatening statements, verbal or physical aggression is never acceptable. Now, I'll pass things along to Steve Payne, Martingrove's Parent School Council Chair, and the one responsible for successfully securing TDSB's newest parent grant, bringing us all here tonight. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. So I'll be brief. I just wanted to say that there's a rumor around town that sometimes the parent engagement can drop off a lot, and there's no such thing as a school council at the secondary level. And Martingrove has shown that that's not accurate. We have a very engaged school council, and so I just wanted to personally thank Heather and Felicia and Ms. Thornton for all the hard work in putting this evening together tonight. And of course, I want to also thank our speaker of the evening. I'm very excited to welcome him to the stage. He's been fabulous in communication back and forth with us, and we're just really excited for him to be here. And I'm actually really happy about the fact that we're going to be able to share this with a broader audience now. So with that in mind, I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Anthony Morgan. Thank you, Anthony.
All right, folks, I'm just going to set myself up. momentarily, if you bear with me. While I do that, can I ask, how's everybody doing? Oh, you just cheered much louder than that moments ago. How's everybody doing? I love it, I love it. I'm really thankful for the opportunity to share with you this evening. I am a firm believer, I said this to a couple folks before, let me move that for the camera. I'm a firm believer that who is supposed to be in the room will be in the room when the time comes. So you're right where you're supposed to be. We're here, we're gonna have a great conversation. And I really do want us to approach this in a kind of way that understands this, what I'm going to share in the context of a conversation. I know that different ones of you have been taking part in this conversation in different ways, whether it be in your homes, in your classrooms, in your community, in different respects. I'm hoping to contribute to that process. I don't come with any answers or the answer. I more come with perhaps provocations or ways for us to think through how we move forward by creating more inclusive spaces of learning. How do we make our schools and our community spaces where we can all just be ourselves and more fully belong and engage in a process of social development more generally that allows each and every one of us to tap into and, to the extent possible, fulfill our fullest potential. Because I think all of us want that for our children, we want that for ourselves, and hopefully we want to see that for our communities. So before I go any further, I do think it's important to offer a couple of words about who I am. Some of you, of course, I imagine have read my bio or read some background information on me and the things that I've been able to do. So, hey folks, my name's Anthony. I do use he, him pronouns, and when I get the opportunity to connect with groups like this, especially within schools, it reminds me of, or makes me think about the time when I was a student and how far I wouldn't say how far I've come, but how much has changed. Because as much as I would like to stand up here and say I'm this very accomplished human rights lawyer and social advocate and been able to go to the Supreme Court and advocate before the United Nations and gone to U of T, McGill, I'm studying at Oxford. These things are all cool things that I'm very, very proud of, don't get me wrong, but I want to also demystify in some respect by noting that the journey definitely didn't start there. When I spoke to a number of parents who have students in, or their children are in grade 9, and at that point in my life, I was not on the trajectory that I'm on now. And so why I say that is because as we grow, as we learn, as we develop, I think it's really important for us to recognize that for our young people, as parents or as caregivers, as educators, that we are nurturing the potential of our young people, right? Where we see how they show up today is not necessarily who they'll become tomorrow, and almost certainly not who they'll become tomorrow. And what will largely make the difference is how we hold, how we support, how we see, how we hear, how we listen, and how we create space for our young people to grow and thrive as they are and not as the people that we want them to be. Does that make sense? Now, we have a smaller group, so this is making me think that we might be able to do a bit of an exercise that I like to use to help stimulate conversation and thinking around the issues of equity, inclusion, diversity, and advancing human rights. Are you willing to indulge me with an activity by participating in an activity? There will be no embarrassing singing, dancing, or anything like that, I assure you. Are you willing to? Oh, that was half-hearted. Are you willing to engage in this activity with me? All right, it doesn't require a whole lot, just your thinking skills and self-reflection skills. Yeah, and some of you might have come across the activity before. Don't spoil it for the folks who haven't, if you know where we're going. But I like to refer to this activity as 5 key identities. Is anybody familiar with the 5 key identities? Exercise? By show of hands? Awesome. So this should be fun. So 5 key identities. So what I want us to do is think about 5 ways in which you would self-identify. Now, when I say that, you might think about different social locations like age, sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and the like. You could offer that if that's one of the 5 core or key identities that you want to use for this activity. But you don't have to use only those. You could say, I'm an avid book reader, I'm a Leafs fan, I am a parent, I am a learner, I'm a filmmaker. Whatever would be core to who you are, what makes you tick, what makes you feel whole in yourself, what would those 5 things be? So I want to give you some time to think about what those things are, each and every individual. I should say, some of you might hesitate because you might wonder, are we going to have to share these? No one's going to be compelled to share anything they don't want to share. So really, we're going to start with the 5 that really help you, you'd say self-identify, or things that you think are really core to who you are, how you would identify yourself. 5 core things, all right? So I'm going to give you about, let's say, loose 20 seconds to think about what would those 5 things be, all right? So we're going to pause. About 20 seconds. Think about what those 5 things would be. Again, they could be anything. They just have to be meaningful to you. I'm going to take out my timer here. Keep us on track. And you just have to hold them in your head. As long as you can do that, I think we'll be okay. All right, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. All right. So, do we have 5? Does everybody have 5? I got this light beaming down. I can't really see you, so I need to hear you. Yeah, we got 5? All right. So, you thinking about how you would identify, how you'd self-identify, 5 things that mean something to you in terms of who you are. Now that you have your 5, I want you to reflect on each of them and cross out 2 on that list. That mental list that you created, cross out 2 of those identities. You decide however you want to, but cross out whichever 2 make sense for you. And that will leave us with how many? Are we sure? Yeah, it'll leave us with 3. All right. So have we crossed out 2 mentally? Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds to think about it. Which 2? All right, so we might not all be there, but to advance the activity, we should have 3. Most of us should have 3. We started with 5, we now have 3, right? Right? Awesome. All right, now cross out 2 more. I'll give you a few seconds to figure out which 2 you want to cross out, but let's say 20 seconds for you to think about 2 more that you would cross out, leaving us with how many? 1. Yes. All right. So now some of you might still be weighing which ones to cross out, but in the interest of moving the conversation forward, most of us should be left with just 1. Started with 5, went down to 3, and now we just have 1. Now here's the part where I will ask you to share. No one's going to be voluntold to share. If you would like to, I welcome hearing what's the 1 that you landed on. Now, before anybody puts their hand up or volunteers to share, you should know that I'm just asking for you to share the 1 that you were left with. You don't have to share anything else. And definitely, for now, we don't want to necessarily hear the other identities that you came up with or the other self-identifiers. Just the 1 that you were left with, and you can offer some words to it by itself, but try not to mention the other 4. Is that okay? Is anybody feeling like they want to share? All right, there.
I am a brother to 2 older sisters.
Lovely. So brother to 2 older sisters. So that's the one you were left with. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? At the back?
Yeah, Mom.
Mom, excellent. Mom comes up often, and our family relations are really important. I'm seeing another hand.
I'm a father of 2 boys.
Father of 2 boys. Thank you for sharing that. Father, mom, brother. Did I see a hand at the very front? No?
I'm a constant learner, always challenging myself.
Constant learner. All right, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think in the white here.
I'm an older sister of 3 brothers.
Older sister of 3 brothers. Awesome. That must mean a lot of, I was going to say headaches. I'm one of many brothers, and I've got 1 sister, and she's the eldest. She's the general. I call her the general. She keeps us in line. And we'll take 2 more. Anybody pressing to share? The back corner there?
I actually have the exact same one as you, so I'll learn.
Constant learner. Nice. Thank you. And in the middle. Yes. Yes.
The ability to actively listen to somebody.
Active listener. That's what I got. So we have brother, mom, father, active listener, constant learner. These are all really important identities that folks have named. And I'm sure there's a range of others. There is no wrong answer in this. It really just matters it's just important for however you would self-identify. Now, I do want to ask a couple of follow-up questions. Will you indulge me in that? So for the folks who answered or who didn't answer, I would like to hear about your process. How did you decide what stayed and what would go on your list? So you had the 5, you had the 3. What was your process for deciding? Does anybody want to offer some words about what your process was? Again, you don't have to share the identity, just share sort of the calculus that you engaged in to determine what your list would be.
I felt like giving up any of them would be like devastating and really depressing, but like which ones would devastate me and depress me least?
Yes. Yes. So perhaps a shorter way of saying that, devastating and depressing, I think those are great words. But what would hurt the least? What would be the least difficult to stomach, to manage in terms of getting rid of? So thank you for that.
So I thought of it as, what did I want to have on my tombstone?
Wow, that's a nice warm thought. But it's important. But it's important. We're born.
What would be on my tombstone? What would be the one word on my tombstone? If there could only be one.
I've done this exercise easily 100 times to now thousands of people, and that's the first time I've heard that answer. That's great. Thank you. Anybody else? We'll take maybe 2 more, 2, 3 more. Does anybody want to talk about their process over here?
The hours spent in a day or in a week. So with all the different roles that I take on, the top 3 are where my hours are spent most.
Okay, where you spend most of your time. That's also a good way of determining, okay, what's most important for me, where I spend my time? Over here?
I thought, thing I'm most proud of.
Things you're most proud of. That's great. That's also a great way of organizing. I'll take 1 more. Want to share their process in the back here?
Just about like prioritizing. The thing next to my list was being a student, and before being a student comes my family. So my static is my sisters.
Awesome. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to ask another follow-up question, and then we're gonna wrap up the exercise. Now, I want to ask, and we've started to get into it. What did it feel like to cross things out on the list? What did it feel like? Again, you don't have to share the identities. Just what we heard, devastating and depressing, which is apt way of describing it. But are there other feelings that came forward for folks? What did it feel like to cross things off the list? In the middle here.
It felt a little discouraging because the things that were on my list kind of described who I am. So without having those a part of my list, it made me feel like that I wasn't the person that I'm supposed to be. So I had like caring and being empathetic on my list, and crossing that off, it made me feel like I wasn't caring and empathetic, and those are like values that are important to me. So it was a little bit hard because I had to pick one, but I had to figure out what was most important to me. So it was a little discouraging seeing the things get crossed off. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And anybody else want to share?
Felt like amputating my own limbs without.
Yeah, excruciating. Amputating your own limbs without an anesthetic. Another pleasant visual. But yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do. So thank you for sharing. Anybody have, you could reinforce you had the same feeling or a very different feeling?
I feel even like ashamed when I crossed out, like, for example, my family. So I was like, am I still a good mom and a good wife?
Yes. Yeah, a feeling of shame. Yeah, if I'm crossing these things out, what is it saying about me and what I value? These people are tremendously important to me, these relations, and I'm going to cut them out. It's a difficult thing to do. Anybody else? We'll take one more.
I think for me, personally, it just meant, because I have this mindset already, is that I can change and things will change about me. There will be things that stick around, but inevitably, when you change, you keep things and you learn things and you let go of things and you bring things back in the future.
Yeah, I like that regenerative kind of approach to thinking about it. So we might be one thing right now, but we evolve, we change, we flow, and it's important to make sure that we keep that in mind. We're not just one thing. So thank you for participating in that activity with me. I want to give you a round of applause, and you can give each other a round. Now, this is, of course, an exercise that any of you can do with a group of folks. I hope you get a sense of where we're going, why we did this exercise, and how it's useful for helping us think about questions or issues of diversity, inclusion, equity, and human rights. Did anybody have an epiphany, or is anybody seeing how the activity connects to those broader conversations? Well, I guess that's why I'm here. I'm sure it's connecting for some of you. But yeah, nobody wants to be wrong. I get that. It's no secret science, but all of us, we carry multiple identities. We carry multiple parts of ourselves. And really what we want to make sure that we're doing to create inclusive schools and spaces of learning, growth, and development is ensuring that as much as possible, we're allowing everyone to bring their full selves so that they don't have to amputate a part of themselves without an anesthetic when they walk through the door. So we don't want to create spaces where, yeah, we'll accept you, but we won't accept your queerness. That can stay at the door, or you living with a disability. We don't really want to hear that. Your sort of ethnic practices, foods, traditions, dress and garb, no, keep that at the door. Remove that from yourself. Right? Many of us who walk through life have to do that, perform a kind of version of ourselves that is not fully ourselves, it is not authentic. And if we want to build inclusive and dynamic schools where we're fully allowing not just students, but also even teachers, educators, whoever enters into the building to fully bring the magic of who they are as a human being into the space, we have to be mindful of what it felt like in this small exercise to cut parts of ourselves off. And we sometimes do that, of course, unconsciously. It's not always that we want to, but part of me wanting to share with you this evening is to encourage us to be mindful of how we speak, what we speak about, could be consciously and unconsciously encouraging folks to not bring parts of themselves into this space. And some of you, many of you, I think there's a consistent line of feeling in some form or another discomfort around that. And for some people, it's more than discomfort. It can also be a level of shame. I have to cut off this part of myself, or disappointment. Why can't I be this part of myself when I'm in this class, or when I'm hanging out with these friends, or when I'm engaging in conversation with this person or that person within this school? And it's also important to recognize, as I'm sure many of you will, that we started with 5, but also 5 is an arbitrary limited number. We are many, all of us are many more than 5 different things, and they all connect to make who we are. So there's also a question of, am I still, as I heard in some of the feedback, is it still me when I start cutting pieces off from this list? And even the 5 wasn't fully you, but I set the terms and the parameters, and I said it's going to be 5, and then we whittled it down even further, and it was a difficult exercise. Right? And so we have to be thinking about, to create dynamic schools, when we think about curriculum, the books that we choose, the lessons that we lead with, the sports that we talk about, who we elevate, the pictures that we have, how we expose each other to learning, growing, and development. Let us think about this exercise. Let us think about what it means to ask folks to cut off parts of themselves so that they can participate. Now, there's a more subtle part of this exercise that is often harder to glean or recognize when it's happening, but it has to do with power. Does anybody know where I'm going with when I talk about that? Like, what is the power dynamic that emerges in it? Well, of course, I've been invited by the lovely Parent Council to be here, and it's because I've done a number of different things. But by and large, if we were to walk in a grocery store, you'll know me from anything. There's no reason for you to listen to me. We don't know each other. I don't have any authority over you, but I'm at a podium, I have a microphone, and people you respect have put me in this place. And so I could say, pick 5 identities. I didn't say none of you could say, well, why can't we do 10? Why not 100? None of you would have felt comfortable, or maybe some, but very few would feel comfortable doing that. And more importantly, nobody did do that. Right? So there's this unspoken dynamic of power when it comes to identities and who we are, and the identities that we carry, even unintentionally. Me standing here and I say 5, you outnumber me tremendously. And this is your space. This is the first time I'm in this building. So in a kind of way, you have more legitimacy and authority in this space than I do. But still, you were compliant. Just followed along. I don't want to be impolite. I just want to listen. I want to follow through. I want to get through the exercise. And again, I'm mentioning that because that is a large part of how folks who live with marginalized identities live. I just want to get through the exercise. I just want to get through class. I don't want to be disruptive. I don't want to confront power, because that could be also uncomfortable. Right? Who's really going to stand up or say, hey, I don't like this exercise. Can we do something else? Or let's talk about, I want to talk about this when it comes to inclusion and diversity. I'm not here for your exercises. In principle, all of you could have done that. Any one of you could have done that. But because of the power dynamic that emerges and that is always present in our human relations, you didn't. And so, again, the point is not just to mention it, but to recognize that in all of our social engagements, like it or not, there is some dynamic of power. And it could be around a skin color, it could be around class, it could be around language. The classic ones that we know, gender, of course, right? Indigenous heritage, being a newcomer versus a person who's indigenous, being black, being queer, trans, living with a disability, right? Living in poverty, right? How we project ourselves, who we are, what we know and understand about each other is impacted and influenced by dynamics of power. And so we have to make sure that even if we have access to and enjoy a level of privilege and power along any of those 5 key identities, our role and responsibility is not, of course, not to exploit and oppress, but actually figure out ways to create more space for other people to bring their full selves and not laud that power over folks, but actually use that power and leverage it so that other folks can be able to participate on a more equal footing. And I'm being deliberate in saying a more equal footing because there are some power dynamics that, of course, individual interactions can't disrupt. Me identifying as a black male, I could be actively engaged in a conversation with a white person who's totally empathetic and compassionate and understanding, but ultimately the way these systems work, in that intimate interaction, that might shift a dynamic of power. But the broader societal constructs of power, we're talking about representation and access to systems that govern our lives, education, employment, housing, healthcare, policing and justice systems, child welfare systems, immigration systems. We couldn't disrupt that, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable in that immediate space of the conversation. The point, more than anything, is to be aware and alive to that dynamic and how it is playing out and how it could be used to silence, but how it could also be used to tap into an individual's, I want to say, their greatness, right, who they are. Because those parts of who we are a big part of what make us tick, will make us feel affirmed, make us feel valuable, and connect to the value we bring to others in this space. So that's the exercise. Any questions? I have much more to share that I could share, but any questions or thoughts? The exercise is done, but so I'm happy to hear from you on that. Anybody left with any burning thoughts? You tried it? Oh, thank you for that feedback. All right, and yeah, feel free. I don't take ownership of it. This is an exercise that we do at the City of Toronto. One of the roles that I hold is working at the City of Toronto. Up until recently, I was the manager of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, and I delivered many learning and engagement sessions. And so this is a icebreaker. So don't feel like you can't use it. Find ways to and also remix it, however you think makes sense for the group you're engaging. I saw a hand at the back. Okay, no problem. So where does this leave us? Now, I do want to leave a section for us to do a Q&A for you to ask any questions or raise any points that haven't been actively engaged that you want to see engaged. But my hope in starting with that exercise, and admittedly that wasn't a part of my initial remarks, but I do feel like with a smaller group that exercise works better, and I hope you found it, sounding like you found it useful. And it also allows me to move more closely into the more particular things that I wanted to share around of course, the topic of discussion this evening. How do we create inclusive schools and communities, right? Our schools should be always understood as part of our broader community. I want to ask a general question by way of shouting out or by way of hands. I want to ask, have any of you learned a new skill? It doesn't have to be recently, but just seen something. At one point in time, you had no idea how to do it, and then another point in time, after some engagement, you learned that thing. By show of hands. Yeah, I think we all have. If in no other way, learning to connect the command in our body to raise our hands, that is something we had to learn as tiny children, and understanding and processing that command. Right? But things like language, learning to read, learning to walk, learning to drive, learning to paint, learning to bake, cook, learning to hold a conversation, learning to get to the washroom from one point of this building to another. These are things, you might say these are not skills, but you had to learn them. You weren't born with that knowledge inside of yourself. There was a process that you had to undergo to be able to gain that understanding. And I think it's the same when it comes to these conversations of inclusion, equity, diversity, whatever you want to call it. If we're talking about creating more spaces of belonging, we have to recognize that we are at different points in the journey of learning. Some of us have the aptitudes and strength, and we know what to do because we've taken on that learning in our own lives or been exposed to certain things that others haven't. But the point is, we can all get better in creating spaces of inclusion and belonging. And the way in which we do that is by thinking through the process we all underwent to get better at anything. Does that make sense? So let's concretize it a bit more. So one of the major things that is important to think about when it comes to learning a new skill or initiative, whether a computer program or a sport, a language, one of the first things I want us to think about is commitment. So if we're talking about building schools that are more inclusive and create more spaces of belonging, we know that it has to be a commitment. I think you all being here is an expression of that commitment. And that's no shade to the folks who aren't here. It's not to say that they're not committed. The point is you are here, you are committed. And for us to actually create those spaces of inclusion, of belonging, we have to recognize that there's commitment. So when you decided that you wanted to become a better baker, or you wanted to learn this language, or even you wanted to learn this song that you heard pop up on I was going to say the radio. People don't listen to radio so much. A new song pops up on your Spotify list, right? Or just your randomly programmed music station. I'm losing my words here. But the point is, there was a process of you recognizing that this thing is interesting, this is valuable. You took time, you were committed to internalizing this thing, and then eventually you got to the point where you're doing karaoke and hoping nobody was taking a video to share at work. That's a joke. But you get the point that I'm making. And so when it comes to engaging in these processes, recognize that we're all at different points in the journey and we can learn. And I think if we take that attitude and that approach, it also allows for more space for compassion and understanding. Because one of the things that happens when we're learning is we might do well and then we fall. We falter. We make mistakes. That has to be understood as okay. Not all of us can ride a bike, but I know many of us would have had experience learning to ride a bike. Right? So yeah, you commit to saying, yes, I'm going to learn to ride this bike. Or your parent says, you're going to commit to learning to ride this bike. And you get to a point, and however you get there, there's a point where you say, yeah, I'm going to try this. But inevitably, you'll fall, you'll stumble. And so creating spaces of belonging and inclusion within schools means also being open to and recognizing and owning the fact that we're going to make mistakes. We're going to launch an inclusion campaign that's going to land improperly with some folks. Some folks are going to see and hear it in a different kind of way, and we're going to have to rejig. We're going to create a curriculum intervention. We're going to share a book. We're going to facilitate a conversation around what it means to live at the intersection of being queer and Asian, or being Black and Indigenous within Canada. And some folks will get it, and some folks won't. Some folks will respond positively. Some folks will respond with resistance. That we have to understand that is part of the process. That's part of the process of getting better at understanding how to create spaces of belonging. None of us is born inherently knowing how to do these things, because by and large, many of us come from, and stats show this, generally we come from relatively homogenous community structures. So we tend to hang out and grow up and be nurtured in the intimacy of our homes and interpersonal relationships with people who are like us. And so when it comes to going to school and being in community, that's when we start interacting with folks with different lived experiences, different religions, different customs, coming from different countries. And so there's a learning, there's a process that we have to undergo. And so instead of thinking about it as either I know or I don't know, I'm in a process of learning. And I think nurturing that and that spirit and that energy creates the best foundation for us to get better at what we're doing. So we'll fall, we'll falter, things will go well sometimes they won't. But just like whatever it is, that skill or that aptitude, that thing that you picked up, eventually if you stay committed and you get back up and you get back on it, you start to develop a strength in it. Does that make sense? Yes. I just want to make sure y'all are following, y'all with me. Is everybody with me? Yeah. All right. Sounds like you are. So there are a couple more things that I want to share about this, and then I'm going to offer one of the learnings that we've developed at the City of Toronto that I think could be helpful for advancing this conversation beyond this space here. But we talked about being committed. We talked about also the fact that we will make mistakes. I want to talk about comfort also. Now, how many times have you heard a conversation around equity, inclusion, diversity, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and there'd be a lot of conversation around comfort? By show of hands, is this familiar? Yes? No? Yes? All right. I do think that there's room for us to think about folks' level of comfort. I don't want to disregard that or diminish it or say it's not important. But what I do want to say is that I worry that we may at times be giving too much energy and attention to folks' level of comfort in this journey. And that stops the process of learning, because comfort ends up taking precedence over creating spaces of inclusion and belonging. So I don't feel comfortable talking about X religion. I don't feel comfortable talking about sexual orientation and gender expression. I don't feel comfortable talking about the experience of indigenous people or the histories of black people, and so we're not going to do it. How do we learn? How do we grow without going into that space? Now, one of the great things that I've been able to learn in doing this work and having various conversations with folks is that we have to be mindful not to confuse a lack of comfort with a lack of safety, because often they get conflated. So a person might say, I feel uncomfortable, but they're not unsafe. They're not being attacked themselves. I will admit, yes, there's some conversations that unfold in a problematic way. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but by and large, when folks are collectively committed to having these conversations in honest ways, they're not unsafe, they're uncomfortable. But often they'll use the language of saying, I feel unsafe, when what they really mean is, this feels uncomfortable. And we also will feel that. And I don't want to say this as if like, this is me, I don't experience that, and you folks experience it. In any growth, learning, and development, that is the process. There is a level of discomfort. It's not comfortable falling off a bike. It's not comfortable starting a knitting pattern and then realizing you've done it all wrong because you didn't read the instructions. It's not comfortable putting hours into editing a video and then realizing that you missed the whole chunk of it in the process. That's part of the learning. It's uncomfortable to learn and grow. I think when these conversations of inclusion, belonging, and equity, again, because of where we are and how fraught these conversations can be, sometimes there's an overextension to make folks feel comfortable. But I want to offer that if we are truly learning in this space, if we're truly growing in this space, there is going to be some discomfort. So it's more important that we name it and that we support folks to know that that is a part of the journey, but no one is going to then have that discomfort used against them. That can't be weaponized. We have to invite it in to say, this might come up, but that's usually a lack of experience and exposure. It makes me think of times where I've traveled and I don't know the local language. Right? The level of discomfort and uncertainty that I experience in that. And some of you might have experienced that in travel too. But you recognize that I'm not unsafe, I just don't feel comfortable. I can't read the signs. But then there are people around you who can help. And you start from where you are and you build. And often you find, if any of you have done any traveling to a space that you're not familiar with, what look like totally foreign language, you start to see certain things or you start to hear certain things that make sense, right? And you build from there because that's increased exposure and understanding and time, and you get there, right? And if you really commit, you can actually internalize that language. But that also takes time, which brings me to the last thing I want to share about this. There are no quick fixes. Often, because of how these conversations unfold, it could be it's really uncomfortable. It could be a news report. This just in, a racist incident at local school. Nobody wants to experience that. Doesn't feel good, but we recognize it happens. Or somebody's getting canceled online, right? Somebody who said something inappropriate, and there's a swarm of folks who say like, oh no, this person needs to be deplatformed. And so there could be an immediate reaction to that. Let's just do something really quick. But for us to really create spaces of dynamic inclusion within our schools, we have to understand that there are no quick fixes. It is a process. Again, think about any skill or any, I want to say trait or anything that you've learned. You recognize that for you to actually internalize it and to do well at it, it is a process. It'll take time, and that has to be okay. So don't try to quick fix solutions. Just create spaces where you can learn, grow, and develop, and understand that we are, again, on a collective journey. I think keeping those things in mind help create the best chances for change. Any questions about what I shared there? All right, I'm going to round out. I know I've been sharing for quite some time now, I want to speak to, and I'm going to end here, a principle that some of you may be familiar with or heard of. It's called Ubuntu. Has anybody heard of Ubuntu? And the Center for Black Student Excellence has probably definitely heard of it. So Ubuntu, it's a concept that emerges out of Southern African philosophy and moral teachings. And generally, it translates in English to, I am because we are. Ubuntu. Can you say Ubuntu? Ubuntu. 1, 2, 3. Ubuntu. I am because we are. And so fundamentally, within that notion is the understanding of interconnectedness. Right? So if I feel okay, we should be feeling okay. If you feel okay, I will be doing okay. So moving away from some of the social pressures that exist to create divides. Queer and black folks over there, indigenous folks over here, newcomers over there, the native speakers over here. Ubuntu helps us understand that we are all interconnected. If these folks are doing well, then we will be doing well. And we don't do well at other people's expense. So when it comes to notions of bullying or mistreatment of certain groups, if we nurture spaces that are informed by the concept of Ubuntu, then we recognize that because of our interconnectedness, we should not be engaging in bad or negative, nefarious behaviors that attack other people. We wouldn't be creating spaces of bullying, or we'd be creating spaces that recognize this immediately and create interventions to say, no, because if we are insulting or creating offense towards one particular group, then all of us are diminished by this. So that's part of the concept of Ubuntu. Another element of Ubuntu is humanity and compassion. The philosophy of Ubuntu helps us understand because of that interconnection, we have to move in a way that recognizes that we have to hold each other with a kind of kindness and understanding. Again, even when we do things, even when we make mistakes, is what I want to say, right? And so Ubuntu is not about attacking others, you get it, versus you folks don't get it, and then attacking each other, but saying, okay, we are in this together. We are in this school together. And so your well-being is connected to my well-being. And so Ubuntu helps us understand that. It also focuses on communalism, so cooperation, collaboration is a key part of Ubuntu in this part of African philosophy. And also restorative justice is a key part. And so that again goes to when people make mistakes, it's not about punitive responses and humiliating or diminishing a person, but Ubuntu would encourage us to think through the fact that we are all on a learning journey, and because this is a process, some will be at different places in it, and so we have to, when somebody does, even if it's deliberate, a misdeed, how we respond to that should reflect this interconnectedness, this compassion, this understanding that we have for each other. And Ubuntu operates at multiple levels. It's at the individual level, the interpersonal level, the institutional level, that would be our schools, and our broader society level, our broader community. And so if we can operate from a spirit of Ubuntu within ourselves, to have that compassion and understanding within ourselves, if we can bring that into our interpersonal relationships with a family or friend circle, and then use that to also influence our institution, as in our schools, spaces of gathering, of worship and community building, then we can also influence our broader society. Those are the different levels of Ubuntu, and I want to leave you with that. Thank you. So I did go longer than expected because I went off script a bit. I hope it was okay. Do you want to stand and stretch for a sec? Let's all stand and stretch our legs. Now this is a skill I don't have, but let's stretch. And it feels uncomfortable because I don't know what I'm actually doing, but we're doing it together. All right, I hope you feel okay. So this is definitely much more informal. I don't know if you want me to come down or what works for folks, but I don't know if there are any pressing questions, thoughts, or ideas. I'm more than happy to offer that time. I am also happy to get a wink and nudge from our organizers to say, we don't have time for that. Do we have a few minutes for that?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm
a teacher at the school.
Yes.
And so one question I have for you is, do you have any strategies that we can help the kids? Because we find that, or maybe it's just me, that they throw out the word racist a lot. Oh, that's racist, when, I think that might not be the case. And likewise, we hear them talking to each other in such a way, when we call it out as not appropriate because it's racist, for example, their answer always is, oh, we're just joking, we're friends, we're joking. And so then we're trying to modify, and support these, these kids through this stage, and we're really left with, we don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what to do when the kids say that back to me, other than, well, I don't think you're joking, and then we get into this weird power struggle, and I'm in the hallway trying to sort it out, and all by myself, and, and then I have to let it go. And I think that we all struggle with that in our classrooms and in the hallway. Like, how do we kind of get them past using the words that are racist, and then, covering it up, pretending that they're joking around? I just,
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I know there are a lot of educators who have that same question. Again, as I started out saying, I don't have the answers. I have some ideas on what could be done in this respect, but I do see a learning opportunity there. So, for instance, the government of Canada, as in the feds, the Ontario government, even the city of Toronto, they all have different definitions of what racism is. I think it would be important, because the language gets thrown around so much, it often loses meaning. And so I think taking advantage of the fact that we're in a space of learning creates an opportunity to say, you're saying this is racist, here's the definition of it. You're saying it's not racist, here's the definition. Here's what we understand racism to actually be within our country, within our society. Also, the TDSB has resources on this, and I'm sure it's been some time since I've reviewed those materials, but I'm sure there's a different nuanced definition of and understanding. And so I think creating spaces to develop that understanding, so that that our students have a more stronger grounding in what is and is not racist, I think is helpful. Because we've also seen this with other experiences and struggles. So, of course, because our society has overwhelmingly been dominated by men, there have been things that historically men would say, "No, we're just joking. We don't mean that." Very sexist and perverted and problematic things that men would say, and "we were just joking" wouldn't suffice. You would say, "That's great, but you're also at school and there's a code of conduct. So you can joke, but there are consequences for that." So you need to understand, I think that is part of, and I don't think it definitely shouldn't be done in an oppressive way, but we have to create a standard where we say, all right, I understand this is something you want to do between each other, but I have a responsibility as an educator within this space to maintain a certain decorum. And what that means is there's certain things that are inappropriate and there's certain things that are appropriate. So it can be a joke to you, but that doesn't give you a pass. Right? We still have this code that we have to operate under. So I think there are opportunities to reinforce our values. What are our collective school values? And so if you identify something that is not consistent with our school values, name that, speak to it, and try to build from there and say, okay, maybe this is a way you want to engage in banter and joke, but in engaging in that conversation and meeting them where they are, they might find that there is a different way to make the same joke that lands in an interesting way, but doesn't use this offensive or problematic racist language. But I think that takes relationship building. That, I think, takes time as well, going to some of the things that I shared. And I think our students will hear us differently based on that relationship. So also, what I've heard from students is sometimes they do end up being deliberately resistant if they don't have that kind of relationship with an educator, where I only get your attention when I do engage in this behavior, but I don't get positively affirmed. They'll articulate it more as feeling policed, right? So like no positive affirmation, but as soon as I say, yo, hey, then suddenly I hear from you. I'm not saying you, sorry. Like young people will say, that's what I hear from the educator, that's what I hear from the teacher. And so they only show up, they only get seen when they're breaking the rules, rather than being positively affirmed in small ways or constructive ways for doing other things. So, and again, that comes with time, relationship, how they see you, when they see you, and the kinds of conversations or culture of conversations that happen within the space. Again, not the answer, not a complete answer, but based on my experience, those are the things that come forward based on what you shared. And thank you for bringing that forward. Any other thoughts, questions?
I'm a teacher here as well. When I was doing the exercise, I was not able to cross anything off. It was just too unpleasant. So and then I thought forgive me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like you said that really bad feeling would be the same as if I was walking into an environment where I did not see myself reflected. Like maybe if it's a student, I don't see myself, I look at the pictures on the walls, I look at the lecture reading, I don't see myself reflected. And then I would get the same feeling from that, and I'm just not sure if they're really the same thing.
No, they definitely aren't the same thing.
So maybe I misunderstood you.
Not necessarily. It's more the fact that parts of ourselves will be seen and affirmed and welcomed, and some we're asked to leave behind. That's the space of comfort that I'm seeing.
And so
But is a lack of affirmation really the same thing as being asked to leave something behind?
No, it's not the same thing, but in terms of the feeling of parts of you are okay and other parts are not. So I don't fully know what you were working through in terms of cutting parts off, but ultimately you didn't. Whereas other people, frankly, don't have that privilege. They have to. They feel like they have to walk into this space silencing a part of themselves. And so that's whatever made you not do it is it's inverted for other folks. They feel like you felt like you had no choice but to keep yourself intact. Other folks feel like I have no choice but to dismantle myself to be able to fit into this space. And I wouldn't move forward. I can't move forward in the same way you didn't move forward in the exercise with cutting things out to participate. So your level of participation was shaped by that. And so it's similarly for folks who carry these identities, who parts of themselves they can bring fully into the space and part of them they don't, but they know that they have to make a choice. You felt that you could make a choice. Based on the exercise, most folks felt that they didn't have a choice. And so that also creates a space of reflection. How is it that I could feel that I don't actually have to choose, but all these other people felt that they had to choose? What does that say about power dynamics and where I'm situated within the society? I think that's the point of reflection that we need to think about here. But thank you for offering that. I can take one more and then yield my space, or yield the space. All right, well, thank you, folks. It was a pleasure. I'm really happy I could connect with you all.
So on behalf of the school council, and obviously the school, thank you, Mr. Anthony Morgan, for helping us learn about how, well, for me, my takeaway was to learn about how to move through my discomfort. And that is actually a growth opportunity. No matter how painful it is, it's a growth opportunity. So thank you for that.
And Anthony, thank you. There were some really good ways to get involved there. Looking at it from a different perspective, and it almost puts yourself in the shoes of other individuals. So, and I just want to thank you very much for coming by. It's been a pleasure corresponding with you, and we hope to have you back again one time. You're always welcome. Thanks, Anthony.
My sentiments as well. Thank you so much, Anthony, for coming out to speak to us during this time. And for me, it's like I took away so much information about looking at the whole person and appreciating all those different parts of us. And within other people, and recognizing that we are all so many different things, and just being present and aware of all those different aspects and appreciating them. So thank you so much, Anthony. And I also wanted to say a thank you to all our wonderful community services who came out tonight. Special thanks to, we have a nice list here, the Center of Excellence for Black Student Youth Achievement from the TDSB. Thank you, Medenta Community Services, Rexdale Community Health Center, Toronto Victim Services, and Youth Assisting Youth. Thank you so much for giving up your time to be here tonight to support this community. And we want to share the word about you far and wide. So thank you.
This event would not be possible with the support of Principal Thornton, teacher representative Ms. Joyce Kite, and obviously all the student volunteers tonight. Thank you so much, and all the parents. And just one more shout out is for that this event tonight was sponsored through the generous support of the School Council Innovation Grant Fund. And I wanted to say thank you to Steve Payne for writing a very successful grant application so that we could host this event this evening. So thank you. All right, and have a good night, everyone. Thank you.